Her gaze traveled over the waters of the palace pond, that beautiful pond similar to a small lake, and to her mind came the memory of those days when she dreamed of using the depths of those waters as a portal to return to her original body, to his time and his previous life. Sitting inside the kiosk that was on the banks of the pond, she remembered with irony a phrase she once heard, "A lot of water has flowed under the bridge," a phrase that tries to exemplify that a long time and many things have happened from a distant moment. For Chiron those days seemed to belong to another life, yet another in a long chain of lives that made up that strange existence that her soul had had to experience. She often asked herself if there were other beings like her in the universe, who had lived what she had lived, and always ended up concluding that it must be very unlikely. In those days that now seemed like a remote and blurred dream, Chiron had been a man named Jang Bungwan, the famous and envied chef of the Blue House, the one in charge of stocking the table of the most powerful man of modern South Korea with great culinary creations. In that life he had been a womanizing man, a promiscuous man who took many beautiful women to his bed, thanks to his physical attractiveness, his charisma, and his charm. But one stupid day he lost everything, because of his enemies, and unjustly persecuted he ended up in the arms of death. But it would not ultimately be death that would claim ownership over his soul, but rather the body of a famous woman, a woman in whom he ended up incarnating. And by the intervention of mysterious forces that he would probably never understand, he ended up imprisoned in the body of that woman, and from then on he became her, Queen Chiron. Chiron smiled wryly. She had long forgotten what it was to be a man, what it was to possess a man's body. She no longer even remembered his/her mighty dragon, that essential part of his/her once sacred manhood. To her surprise, the few times that the faint and dying memory of her having possessed a mighty dragon came to her mind, that produced a certain disgust, the same as any woman must feel when imagining herself in such a trance. Who was going to tell you, Jang Bungwan, that you would end up being a woman and feeling disgusted for your disappeared male body, thought Chiron without taking her eyes off the placid waters of the pond. The question was supposedly addressed to herself, but she increasingly felt that it was addressed to a strange person, since Jang Bungwan had ceased to exist for her. In some strange way, his consciousness had fused with the memories, feelings, and wishes of the real Kim So-young, Queen Chiron's birth name, and in the process, his former self had disappeared, to make way for this woman who was now. Chiron knew that her change was irreversible when she realized that she was in love with Cheoljong. Sitting there in front of the pond, Chiron closed her eyes and pursed her lips a little, outlining a lewd gesture on her face, as she felt how her skin bristled, and to her mind came the image of Cheoljong's face and other parts of his body. The internal struggle she had fought when she fell in love with Cheoljong and tried to deny it herself, while desperately clinging to the remnants of his dying manhood, had ended very soon when the passionate love for Cheoljong took over, and it took over every corner of her heart. He started out as her enemy but ended up being her best friend, her confidant, her protector, her home, and her lover, especially her lover. Memories of the previous night flooded her head, how Cheoljong came to her kissing her passionately, and how she reciprocated with enthusiasm, both of them eating their mouths with fervor. Very soon their clothes were a hindrance and they desperately took them off, leaving them completely naked. Cheoljong's hands traveled over Chiron's body, exploring every corner it, stopping at those sensitive spots where they rummaged, awakening waves of excitation that ran through her skin like fire in a forest. But not only Cheoljong's hands but also his mouth traveled over Chiron's body from top to bottom, tracing hot trails that set her on fire, and then Chiron responded with fervor by stimulating Cheoljong's body with her own hands and lips. Both were two wolves that devoured each other, in a feast of hands and lips, of kisses and caresses. When the passion had reached the boil, they both joined their bodies and once again Chiron went mad when she felt Cheoljong inside her. Cheoljong and Jiren loved each other in a frenzy, in a wild dance, in an aggressive and intimate choreography, him inside her, in the middle of gasps and sweat. And in the end, they climaxed, in that wonderful explosion that made Jiren feel her body disintegrate and her mind dissolve into an indescribable sensation, as her eyes rolled back and a cry of pleasure rose from her throat. That is why the first time she had experienced it she had compared it to something better than a fluffy piece of bread. Jiren's face outlined a peculiar lust gesture as she recalled, a gesture that looked more like that of a rascal man recalling his exploits in bed, a somewhat masculine lust, one of Jang Bungwan's few features that still survived in her. Yes, sex with Cheoljong was definitely one of the things that fueled that passion, that wonderful and immeasurable love that she lives with her husband, but it was not the only thing. There was much more between them. There was an infinite understanding, a blind trust, an incredible connection, a camaraderie like she had not felt with any other man when she had been a man, a rational or cerebral unit, a way of they complement each other as if they were two parts of a single being. They were two opposite personalities that together formed an extraordinary and sublime entity, built with the force of love. In short, they were soulmates, united by a probably eternal destiny. As Jiren reflected on what had happened, a conviction born of intuition took over her mind, the conviction that Jang Bongwan had been the reincarnation of Jiren. Therefore there were not two different souls, but a single soul that had first lived as Jiren and then reincarnated as Jang Bongwan, but for some reason, Jang Bongwan had to return to his previous life, to his previous incarnation. And then the two personalities of the same soul had merged to create Sobong, that nickname she sometimes used to refer to herself. A new person who had been the product of the fusion of two life experiences of the same soul. But what she couldn't explain were the changes in Korean history, as she remembered it. Cheoljong had managed to defeat, with Jiren's help, his enemies from the Andong Kim and Pungyang Jo clans, and had managed to re-establish and strengthen royal authority. Queen Sunwon had died some years after being defeated and relegated to a role of utter helplessness, practically a prisoner of Cheoljong and Jiren. Queen Zhou or Xinjiang lived bitterly and also in a kind of luxurious captivity, isolated from the outside world and watched over by maids who were loyal to Jiren, recruited by Lady Choi. With Jiren's support and advice, Cheoljong was modernizing Joseon, trying to turn it into an industrial and military power, modeled on the Japan of the Meiji Restoration, which Jiren drew from Jang Bongwan's knowledge of history. At the same time, the Jiren and Cheoljong couple were trying to create a constitutional monarchy, to gradually transfer power to the people. It was a very difficult road, with many stumbles and facing strong resistance, but if they were successful they would probably be able to avoid the Japanese colonization and the division of the country, the totalitarian dictatorship in the north and the Korean War. Jiren feared that changing history would cause unwanted effects, with that of the butterfly effect, but she consoled herself by thinking that perhaps she had not only traveled in time but had also traveled to a parallel universe. In any case, she had to do it for her family, and that was another thing that had changed a lot from the history she remembered. "Mom, I'm bored!" exclaimed the little princess. Jiren looked at her daughter and smiled between pride and mocking. She was like a miniature version of herself, both physically and in her personality. Definitely, the girl's personality was reckless, irreverent, and rebellious, quite capricious and moody, but also cheerful, generous, and affectionate in her way. "Are you bored, my little princess?" Jiren asked mockingly. "Sure. I'm fed up. We've been here a long time. Can't you get tired yourself of seeing that stupid pond, Mom?" protested the girl. Lady Choi gave a grunt of protest and looked at the girl disapprovingly. "There is no one around, Lady Choi," exclaimed the girl, reminding Lady Choi that she could call her mother Mom instead of Her Majesty when they were alone, or in the company of trusted people like Lady Choi herself. Your Highness of hers knows my opinion, she should call her mother Her Majesty even in intimacy, but above all, she should speak with more respect in front of her elders, said Lady Choi. Jiren saw that the girl was going to protest and decided to stop the discussion. Leave her, Lady Choi, the princess knows what her limits are. And tell me, my precious daughter, why are you so bored? Jiren asked. You've been reading a while ago and then looking at the pond. I'm tired of drawing, and she's boring, said the princess, pointing at Hong Yian. Hong Yian pointed a finger at herself and a look of surprise on her face. Not you. Her, pointed the princess, pointing to the bundle that Hong Yian had in her arms, which was a baby, another princess, the youngest daughter of Jiren and Cheoljong. She just sleeps, eats and continued the princess. Your Highness! Lady Choi exclaimed in outrage before the girl said a rude thing. The mother and daughter laughed. Leave your little sister alone! Jiren exclaimed, getting a little more assertive with her daughter, and then turned to Hong Yian. Bring me my little angel, the princess who behaves well, at least until she begins to talk and walk. Hong Yian got up and walked over to Jiren, and with great care and tenderness, she placed the baby in her mother's arms. Jiren looked lovingly at her little daughter, her cheeks flushed and her face placid when she slept, and she thought she saw Cheoljong's features in her. Suddenly a maid approached and announced the arrival of the king. Cheoljong was accompanied by a boy, Cheoljong, and Jiren couple's eldest son, the crown prince. The rebellious princess approached Cheoljong and cheerfully greeted her father, who reciprocated by stroking her cheek. The girl stuck out her tongue to tease her older brother. Jiren's heart raced and her cheeks flushed as she remembered the previous night of passion as she watched Cheoljong. He smiled at her a mischievous smile. How are you, my queen? Asked Cheoljong. It could be better. It's hard having to take care of our daughters while you play politics with our son. I think I need a vacation, said Jiren, trying to look angry to hide her excitement when she saw her husband, while Lady Choi and Hong Yian were exchanging glances and teasing and amused smiles. Do not worry, my queen, surely now you will take refuge in the kitchen to relax cooking as you always do. And at night, while you and I talk and study together with the affairs of state until we fall asleep, surely you will find something relax, Cheoljong said as he brought his face closer to Jiren's and met her eyes with an intense and seductive gaze. Lady Choi and Hong Yian both blushed and looked away while giving mischievous or malicious smiles. Cheoljong was probably the first king who shared his bed with his wife every night, with his queen consort, and most nights it was for more than just talking and reading together. After having 3 children, their passion had not diminished, quite the contrary. Jiren was stunned when Cheoljong flirted with her, but then she came to her senses and coughed nervously as she tried to hide her desire. It's okay, my dear Cheoljong, at least start carrying our youngest daughter. My back hurts at night, from the posture I fell asleep in last night, Jiren replied, clearing her throat and embarrassing herself again, while her friends Choi and Hong Yian showed their red cheeks again. Cheoljong smiled happily and carefully took the baby from his wife's arms, and cradled her in his own arms. He viewed his daughter with devotion and tenderness. Jiren saw her husband with their daughter in his arms. She saw their other daughter talking happily to their son while Lady Choi and Hong Yian talked and laughed with them both, and then she saw Cheoljong's face again, that face so beloved, and she was filled with infinite joy, and she felt gratitude for the day she fell from the top of a building into a swimming pool, because that day she began a journey of transformation, self-recognition, and discovery of friendship and true love, a journey whose end she never wants to see.